homologation and compliance at Ford Motor Company. And she's been a leader in this industry, in this area for a long time. So I'm just really, really thrilled, Cynthia, that you are going to be able to join us today, and look forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you. And thanks to the Great Lakes Economic Council for having us here today to speak on this very important topic. Can you guys see my screen? Is it sharing it?
We're not seeing it yet. Oh, then here it comes.
There, can you see it now?
We can see it now, and you can just start. Great.
Seems to be a delay there, but let's fix this. How's that?
Excellent, thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. So again, I'm Cynthia Williams. I'm the Global Director for Sustainability, Homologation, and Compliance at Ford Motor Company. I'd like to start off by outlining Ford Plus. Ford Plus is our plan to deliver products, distinctive products and solutions. And that includes, with an eye on always, on a relationship with our consumers and ever-changing user experience. So the changing, our world is changing and our sense of purpose is staying constant. Ford's purpose is to help build a better world where every person is free to move and pursue their dreams. Today, I'd like to talk more about Ford's electrified future. Last year, we announced our aspirational goal to become carbon neutral no later than 2050. We have a science-based plan. Ford is committed to being a leader in sustainability. We have interim goals that were just approved by SBTi. We also have goals around our manufacturing facilities to use only 100% renewable electricity to power our facilities by 2035. We have a plan, and our plan is to concentrate on 3 areas that account for over 95% of our emissions that we emit at our facilities, again, our factories and our suppliers. We remain committed, and we have a plan to do this. Let's talk about our investment. We're investing over $22 billion to make our electrification plans a reality. We're also investing over $1.8 billion to transform our Oakville assembly complex. We're totally committed, and we're investing billions to make it happen. Let's talk about our strategy. Our strategy is simple. We plan to electrify our most iconic products. We're going to electrify F-150, Mach-E, and the Transit. The goal here, again, we're playing to our strengths, and we want to deliver things that our customers love. We have a purposefully designing format. So we're leveraging EVs technology to provide exceptional performance attributes. Our vehicles will have the latest connectivity technology, allowing over-the-air updates, connected features. We have all electric range planned from 210 to over 300 miles. Our goal is to make range anxiety a thing of the past. Mustang, F-150, Transit. These are the most iconic automobile brands in the world. And we're powering these products with electric technology. This is the prize vehicle here. This is the Mustang Mach-E. I'll tell you, I received my Mustang Mach-E about a month ago, and I'm still amazed at what it can do. It is an awesome product, I'll tell you that. It's sporty, It's fast, and its Mustang heritage shows. The Mustang Mach-E offers a variety of models, and I'll tell you, it lets the customer choose what's best for them, whether price point, battery range, or whether it's the drivetrain. And we also have a GT coming soon. Now, with the $7,500 tax credit applied, pricing ranges in the U.S. about 35,000, just over $35,000 to $53,000. And let's look at some more features that the Mustang Mach-E has. We call these our product pillars. There's an amazing tech feature that includes a giant 15.5-inch touchscreen. There's the latest sync. There's phone as a key. There's over-the-air capability, and soon to be released Blue Cruise hands-free highway driving function. Standard range extended. Those are the battery options. You have front-wheel drive, you have all-wheel drive, and again, the range it goes between a 211 to 305 miles range. You choose what's best for you. There's a mobile charger included. There's a Ford home charging option. And, once you look at that and the Ford charging network, your charging needs are covered. The SUV form factor and no engine means lots of interior space for you to package your items. And let's look at the Ford EV certified network. This is really important in our mind. We have over 2,100 certified EV dealerships. These EV dealerships are trained, and if there's any assistance you need, there's roadside assistance that you can call. And if you're within 35 miles of a location to a charger, you need to be towed to. Hey, that's an option for the customer. But again, we want to make sure that the customer has options. If you have an issue, you have a concern, over 2,100 dealers in our network that can service you. And these dealers will be trained. You'll be able to test drive these all important vehicles at the locations. So again, certified dealer network, over 2,100. The Ford truck, vehicles you trust. The EV Transit is designed for work and fleet customers. Our all-electric F-150 will serve the needs of both personal and work consumers. Look out for hearing more about the F-150, all-electric F-150 BEV coming soon near you. Let's talk a little bit more about the 22 E-Transit. Now, the 22 all-electric E-Transit, it meets the needs of businesses, both big and small. It's all about things you expect. It's going to have all the things that you expect in an E-Transit, but using affordable electricity. It's protected by an 8-year, 100,000-mile warranty, and can be serviced again at any of those 2,100 dealerships that I mentioned on the prior slide. It features full telematics connectivity and embedded navigation. Ford understands the needs of our commercial customers. When we analyze Ford data, Ford telematics data, we analyzed over 30 million driving miles. And with that data, what we saw that we learned on average daily driving for our commercial van customers in the US, it's about 74 miles per day. The electric range for the E-Transit is tailored to fit the needs of our commercial buyers. And again, it's going to be at a total cost of ownership that's low. 126-mile range plus 3,800 pounds payload, starting at below 45,000. And let's talk about some of how do we ensure EV success in the future? Again, the existing public chargers in the US run about, they're a patchwork of different service providers. What we wanted to do at Ford is connect those. So with our Ford charging network, this links access to over 16,000 of the chargers across the US. Again, we wanted to make it effortless for our consumers. And that includes over 2,500 DC fast chargers. Again, so proud of this announcement on Tuesday. On Tuesday, we announced that we were going to form a dedicated battery center of excellence. This place will be located it's called Ford Ion Park, and that's in Allen Park, Michigan. The facility will be used to accelerate our research and development of battery and battery cell technology, including future battery manufacturing. State-of-the-art location. Now, when we talk about the broader acceptance of EVs, you've just heard about the Ford products coming. Tom's going to talk about some of the GM products coming. So the vehicles that customers will love, we're going to have the vehicles there. You got acquisition costs and cost of ownerships that we're working to make sure that we bring those costs down. But we want to work as an industry to make sure that we progress not only technology, bringing the technology costs down, how do we localize manufacturing to make sure that jobs remain in North America? We also want to make sure that we have a tremendous amount of charging locations throughout North America so that consumers, when they look at the corner, just like you see a gas station today, you'll see a charging location, right? So we want to make sure that we alleviate charging as a barrier. But also as the foundation is, once we have EVs, we need clean power to power those vehicles. As you can see on the right hand side, we have a large hurdle to go there. But if we work together, I think one thing that we can do is accelerate that transition and make sure the things that are necessary to make this successful happen. Just to finish up here, at Ford, we're proud. We're providing our customers with products and service that they love, and we want to help build a better world where everyone is free to move and pursue their dreams. Thank you, and thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Really appreciate it. And I will tell you that you have already sparked a really great conversation. There's some wonderful questions. I've been already writing them down. We're going to go to a panel discussion after we hear our next two speakers. So please continue to ask those questions, and I am taking note of those. So really appreciate that. I'm going to transition here to Tom Van Heeke. He is the policy lead for mobility and climate change at General Motors. So Tom, we are just delighted to have you with us as well. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks to the council for having GM here. Really pleased to be here on behalf of the company, and I've been looking forward to this conversation. It's such an important one. It's a really exciting one. This is very much in the air right now. In the U.S. at least, and glad to talk about it a bit more here with this really esteemed group. Let me just jump in here to my remarks and just begin by sharing a little bit about GM's business and cultural transformation that's been taking place over the last few years now, since Mary Barra shared GM's new vision, 000 vision, with the world back in 2016, 2017. This is a vision, as GM sees it, for a future with zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. I'll focus mostly on the zero emissions part of things today, but happy to take questions on other things too. What that really means in terms of our product portfolio is that GM is committed to an all-electric future, zero emissions from our vehicles, period. You might have heard recently that the company has announced an aspiration to eliminate tailpipe emissions from our light-duty vehicles by 2035. We're pledging carbon neutrality shortly after that across our business and our operations. And we're on a march to do this. We've set a pathway. We, like Ford, have a science-based target approved by SBTi, and we're on our glide path here. This is a social imperative, as Mary explained. We want to put everyone in an EV because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's an exciting thing to do for customers. This is a terrific ownership experience. These are better products than traditional vehicles, and we're excited to show that to the world, and we're going to put everyone in an EV and find a way to do that. So this all starts with us and our investments. GM has committed to $27 billion of internal investment in our EV and AV portfolio over the next 5 years. That means that more than half of our internal engineering resources and staff are oriented now to that future-facing product development for EVs and AVs. And it's going to lead to 30 new EVs launched globally by 2025. Many of those will be here in North America. I'll talk a bit more about what those vehicles might look like in just a second. These investments are also key to us driving continued advances in range in our batteries and driving down the costs of those batteries, which are important cost drivers for these vehicles. We can talk a bit more about that in a moment as well. A lot of this investment is actually happening right here in the Great Lakes region. We have major investment going on in Factory Zero. This is a factory that GM has maintained in Detroit-Hamtramck for a long time, but it's in the middle of a massive gut rehab. We'll be building the Hummer EV and the Cruise Origin shared autonomous vehicle in that plant. Lake Orion in Michigan is already home to the Chevy Bolt EV and will be home to the new Bolt EV and Bolt EUV. Lordstown, Ohio is where we'll be putting in a new greenfield battery facility, one of two that we're building to fuel these vehicles as we move forward. And the BrightDrop EV600, GM's offering in the electrified cargo delivery space, we anticipate building that in Ontario. So this expanding EV lineup, 30 vehicles, as I mentioned, most of them will be available here in North America. What's important about this lineup, as you'll notice here, is that we've got entries in every brand, in every segment, across every price point for every consumer. And that's important because we know that if we want to scale EVs and reach 100% adoption one day, which is an imperative if we're going to reduce climate emissions in the transportation sector, we're going to have to meet consumers where they're at. And not everyone is the same. They have different needs and expectations of their vehicles. So we need SUVs, crossovers, hatchbacks, delivery vans, and performance vehicles, pickup trucks. And we've got all of that on offer here, already announced in our plans. And on top of that, we're pivoting to this new future in personal mobility with the Cruise Origin, the shared autonomous vehicle. So let me just share a bit more about what these vehicles look like so you can picture them in your mind. This is the new Bolt EV launching in 2021, a refreshed version of the existing best-selling vehicle. This is actually the reason Chevy is the #2 best-selling EV brand of all time in the United States, behind only Tesla. So coming this summer, we'll have the new Bolt EV. The one you see here on the right is the so-called Bolt EUV, a slightly larger utility version of that vehicle, which is actually also going to feature Super Cruise, GM's advanced driver assist technology for hands-free driving on the highway. The Cadillac Lyriq is Cadillac's first pure BEV. It's a very stylish SUV, as you can see, capable of pretty significant fast charging speeds, coming in 2022. The Hummer EV is the first all-electric super truck. You've probably seen some of the commercials for this. GM's very proud of this development. Lots of unique features. Early availability this year. And then this is what the BrightDrop EV600 will look like, delivering up to 250 miles of range for delivery partners. What's exciting about this particular vehicle is that it pairs well with other solutions in the BrightDrop suite of products, including the EP1 electric pallet. All of this is inspired and intended to address some of the friction we're starting to see in urban delivery, which is only accelerated because of the pandemic, these trends toward e-commerce. It's driving up urban emissions, it's driving up congestion, it's causing issues in cities. We think we can solve that with an all-electric suite of delivery solutions, including the EV600s. So that was just a bit about the products. We're trying to meet those needs of customers. This is another important aspect of the story. Batteries, as I'm sure many of you will appreciate, are a key cost driver for EVs, and we've actually made remarkable progress driving down those costs over time as an industry. We're expecting that to continue The thing is, and the tension here is that we're trading off those cost improvements with the realization that to meet more consumers' needs, we're going to have to provide more range. So you see this on the right-hand side here. This is slightly anonymized and protected data from our customer research. To reach the most customers, we've got to provide increasing amounts of range. And that, of course, comes at a cost. So this is our back and forth, our tension here. And so we know that developing a reliable and increasingly cost-effective EV battery supply chain is really important to the sustainability of a profitable enterprise and business based here in the Great Lakes region. A lot of this is going to hang on recycling, actually, we think. That's one way to augment supply and to do so cheaply. Potential opportunities for onshoring some of the mining and mineral processing and refining operations as well. We think this is also important to consider as a regional, maybe even continental approach. As it is, our industry is extremely interwoven across our borders. We all know that. This should be no different, and we'll need to think collectively and creatively about how to build sort of a more robust supply chain and a recycling network that leverages all of our expertise and our existing cross-border relationships to bring these materials together and support our industry. So let me talk a bit more about some of the requirements that we see for broader EV adoption for ultimately hitting that 100% goal. I've talked a bit about longer range at an affordable price. I've talked a bit about performance and utility across a range of vehicle types. So I like to say that's GM's end of the bargain. But where we need some help is on charging infrastructure and supportive policies. And that's where I spend a lot of my time in our public policy team here at General Motors. So we're already making investments ourselves to advance infrastructure. We have a major partnership with EVgo that you may have heard about. We're tripling the size of the country's largest public fast charging network. These are going to be available in 40 metro areas, powered by renewable energy, available to the public. That's really important. But frankly, we need to do a whole lot more. Atlas Public Policy, an NGO based in DC, released a report about a week or so ago, documenting, as they see it, the scale of the challenge. We're going to need hundreds of thousands of these chargers across the country. And right now, the business case for certainly public DCFC is very, very strained. We have to build these ahead of the demand. They have to be there so customers see them. We hear this from our dealers all the time. Customers want to have seen these things out in the wild before they buy the car for extra comfort to know that they exist. But that means you got to build them before the demand is there. So to do that, to make that work, we're going to need public funds and support. And we have a number of ideas of how to do that. So that circles back to really my day job here at GM, just advocating for policies that accelerate EV adoption. We want to improve EV affordability and reward consumers for making the switch. That means reliable, compelling purchase incentives when you purchase the car, ownership perks such as HOV lane access privileges. This is very common in California, for example, less so in the Midwest, but we actually have opportunity here in Michigan. There's a new HOV lane coming in on I-75 in Metro Detroit. That could be a great place to do this here locally. We want to avoid unreasonable EV registration fees. These are popping up more and more and create friction in the purchase process. We want to support charger deployment with public investments, new tax credits, building codes and permitting reforms, and intelligent rate design to improve the business case for public DCFC in particular, but also to improve that TCO, that total cost of ownership calculation for both individual resale consumers and fleet operators who we know are very sensitive to those small adjustments in prices. And finally, where I get really excited is harnessing the power of markets with policies like the Transportation Climate Initiative, which currently exists in a few states in the Northeast, or low carbon fuel standards, to help send a durable price signal through the entire market that moves people in this direction, while at the same time creating potentially new revenues that can be reinvested to support things like EV purchase incentives and the like. Now, we could learn a lot from our friends in Canada on this front. I know that Canada is in the midst of regulatory development for a national LCFS. And of course, Canada has carbon pricing as well at a federal level. Those are things we can learn from, perhaps even create cross-border partnerships similar to the Quebec-California cap and trade relationship, perhaps even here in the region, to help generate new revenues and drive the market in a more sustainable direction right here where we all live and work. I'll stop there. Looking forward to questions. And thanks again so much for having GM here.
Well, thank you, Tom. I very much appreciate that. It's wonderful, and especially appreciate you highlighting some of those policies and supportive policies and potential partnerships. I think we're going to circle back around to that when we get to our panel discussion, but I appreciate you highlighting those. I'd like to turn now to our third speaker. Our third guest here today is Steve Christensen, and he is the Executive Director of the Responsible Battery Coalition. And Steve, I've already seen people asking questions in the chat about end of life, life cycle analysis. What are we going to do to make sure that batteries are also sustainable? So I think it's a perfect segue for you and the Responsible Battery Coalition. So welcome. And thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here, and great to be here with Cynthia and Tom as well, and Greg. And yeah, just get right into it here. So looking forward to the questions after. You know, as we've already heard, you know, you hear how, you know, Tom and Cynthia's companies are doing business, and because the world's changing, right? And how it approaches, environmental responsibility, sustainability, you know, whatever word you want to use. And it's not only, you know, political, where we're seeing it, you know, with the new administration and so forth. I mean, this is also how we do business now. I mean, BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, requires companies, before they will be, lent money for expansion, they need to submit a plan that says, this is how we're responsible with our product. This is how we approach our our emissions, so forth. So, I mean, there's really, it's really penetrated now. And, it's natural if a company uses vehicles that they go to electrification, and they jump right away to it. But as we've also heard, there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. You heard the right way to do it, the way Ford and GM is doing it. I mean, but everybody's kind of got their own interpretation of what a green vehicle, would be, or what it means to, electrify. And no offense to Dodge, I actually own the 50-year-old big brother to this, and trust me, it's not green at all. But it's fun to drive though. Anyway, so, going electric is part of the answer, right? But it's not the entire answer. And actually, as we move to electrification, it also poses challenges. And these challenges are there's near-term and long-term challenges with this. I mean, one of them is the non-circularity in the economy right now of, just pick on lithium-ion batteries for a minute, but anything that's really non-lead, the economy for it's quite linear. So it's used, it goes right into recycling, and most of those materials are repurposed. Many of them actually are just made into another form of waste. They can't be recycled. They can't be made into new batteries. A lot of it comes to do with cost and so forth. So we're looking at ways we can approach that. Also, what we're going to see here is by 2030, we should see about 17% adoption, is what a lot of folks are predicting, of electric vehicles, which qualifies then as mass adoption. But also at the same time, we're going to see about 4 million batteries, come out of service that are, currently in service, because they about every 10 years. So we have to have plans in place on how to manage those and so forth, and get the most we can out of them. And there's a lot that that could be done there. Again, there's a way to do this where batteries can play a role in actually lowering environmental profiles. So I don't mean to be all about problems and so forth. I mean, these are just challenges that the industry is approaching right now. And really, I say this often, but to say right now that this can't be done, or some be pessimistic about it, I liken it to early 50s saying we can't get to the moon. I mean, this industry, as you just heard, is innovating, at just lightning speed. I mean, it's amazing how fast they're going and what they're creating. And it's just amazing, and we will get there, absolutely. But other challenges that are posing, Tom touched on this a little bit, is materials and getting the materials to make the batteries. It poses a logistical challenge as well as an environmental challenge, because they come from all over the world. And it's great to hear the work that's happening to source the materials in North America. But right now we don't really have much. So we're looking at ways in how we can at least keep the materials here. Because as you'll see in a few minutes, when we think about the emissions involved in shipping these materials around the world, right now the materials cross several oceans, sometimes, multiple times. So we're looking at ways in how we can reduce that, or when they do cross, that, they're crossing in a way that doesn't increase the emissions profile. There's also folks talking about, well, let's just change the materials up. You know, let's just make a battery made out of materials that are easier to get or cheaper materials. And these are the main, critical materials for batteries that most folks are familiar with: lithium, cobalt, magnesium, and manganese and carbon. There's, like I said, there's some U.S. production of lithium. It's increasing, which is great. Cobalt, it only comes from copper mining, which is, decreasing in the U.S. Unfortunately, but most of it comes from DRC, and as we know, the Chinese companies are the ones that are getting it. And again, this poses a bit of a national security issue for us too, as our especially as our federal fleets move to electrification. The president has a goal to electrify the entire U.S. Postal Service fleet. That's wonderful. If we're dependent on a single country in 10 years, when we need to replace those batteries, actually even less, we're going to have to go to foreign sources to do that. So it's, it's great to hear that we're working on these types of things. And there's ways to facilitate that too. But as we limit materials in batteries, we also limit the cost. And this is, again, back to that linear economy that we have right now. And this is an analysis that we're working on, and I'll get into this in a minute, what we're doing with the Argonne National Lab. And we're looking at creating building the business case essentially for a circular economy for batteries. And somewhat obvious, but when you start removing the materials that are worth a lot of money, you also remove the incentive to recycle that battery. So if you fill a battery essentially with metals that are widely and cheaply available, the cost of getting to them and it exceeds any sort of profit that might be in it for recycling. And so we don't really see this with lead, right? Because lead has a value on, after it leaves, after it's extracted, after it's taken out of the battery, it still has a value to where, a lithium ion battery works in the opposite direction. A recycled cathode is about 3 times the price of a new one, of a primary material one. So it's just better to go get a new one, right? But again, there's no business case for doing it the other way. So, we're working on that. But yeah, so I don't mean to all be about problems. Let's talk about solutions, right? I don't want to just highlight all the bad stuff. So the work we do at the Responsible Battery Coalition, we're a principles-based organization, so we don't focus on one chemistry or over another or anything like that. We really work on creating the best practices for managing a battery throughout its life cycle. And our members, which include Ford Motor Company, as well as battery manufacturers like Clarios, and we have folks who just use a lot of batteries like FedEx, others who sell batteries to consumers like Advance Auto Parts, and Walmart. And we also have recyclers like Li-Cycle. It's a Canadian-based recycler, and we work on various projects that create the best practices for the entire life cycle of the battery. And that's really our goal, is to create the circular economy for the next generation of batteries. So essentially, putting the battery, to work is just a part of its point in time. But again, its entire life cycle is managed properly. So how do we do that? Well, one of the projects we do is, which you'll hear more about in a little bit from Greg, but we're working with the University of Michigan. And what we did with them is we created the 10, what we call the 10 principles, green energy storage and mobile applications. And I won't go through every single one of them, but essentially these are 10 principles for characterizing and being able to understand and methods to minimize the emissions associated with a battery throughout its entire life cycle. So we're looking at choosing a battery chemistry that minimizes its environmental impact. The production burden, per energy service, and then going all the way to end of life, designing it so you can get to those materials, again, lowering the cost of the ability and increase the ability to get to those materials. But again, short-term, long-term goals, right? We're not going to solve all the problems on material sourcing. It's real easy to say, oh, well, just minimize that. Well, we still have to get the cobalt from a certain place, right? So what Greg and his team have been able to do is look at, well, what can we do in the short term to essentially, manage what we have now And one of the places we focused on with the help of Ford and our other OEM member Honda North America is looking at, and FedEx as well, because again, they have a lot of electric vehicles in service. They actually have the most diverse electric fleet in the world, is FedEx. And I'll say it here, I think they're going to be the first ones to put an electric airplane in the air commercially. Yeah, it's exciting stuff they're working on. But anyway, keeping a battery in service longer and really keeping it out of that end of life and having to go get new batteries is something in the short term that can be done right now to minimize the environmental impact. And again, but it also goes with principle here about number 4 and number 3, which is basically about charging and managing the battery. That I'm sorry, number 8 too, that you're charging it on a clean grid. So it's a charge clean, discharge dirty, is part of this as well. So it's a set of trade-offs, but really it's a way of, again, characterizing the battery throughout its life cycle to ensure that its environmental profile is minimized as possible. And then going into the long term, then we can then look at, well, how can we minimize materials and so forth, and how can we look at ways in which we can really maximize the efficiency of the battery. So moving on, as I mentioned briefly before, the economy of circular economy in the closed loop system needs to be developed for the next generation. But again, it's nice to have that edict, right? But as far as it has to be commercially viable. It can't just be things that we make up in our office in Milwaukee and decide, this is what the world needs to look like. We want to build a business case, and we're working with the National Lab at Argonne. We're using the Everbat model, and it's just in the very early stages because we're basically going into the unknown here. We're creating something that doesn't exist yet, and there's a lot of gaps in the data. So along that way, we have to figure out, okay, well, how do we fill that data? And as I showed you that chart earlier, we're looking at how different metals influence recycling processes. We're also looking at how the battery might be packaged, what sort of other materials can be used in the external parts of the battery that can increase recyclability, and again, generate more circularity in the life cycle. And then looking at ways in which you can actually recycle the battery, different methods and so forth. One of the issues that comes up a lot in discussions with policymakers is, well, what can we do to help you out? They a lot of times they want to create standards, or they want to, the government, they want to get involved in something, help you out a little bit. And sometimes the help they want to give isn't necessarily what you want, because again, the industry's innovating so fast. Usually my response to standards are, those can stifle innovation. Obviously we want safety, reliability, those types of things, but the industry is already far ahead of pretty much anyone on that. But again, we won't want to stifle any sort of innovation. But one thing that I think a place where we can get to policy-wise is ways to incentivize recycled content in batteries. And again, I was talking about, the increased cost with recycled materials for new batteries. One way that can be approached is essentially by, looking at ways to incentivize the actual recycled materials. And when we're incentivizing buying the car, let's also incentivize, the manufacturing side of it too. In other ways in which, OEMs and manufacturers can essentially create more of that circularity on their own. So we like to bring the science-based, solutions, not only to the industry, but also to the policy side as well. And really our mission is the responsible management of today's batteries, as well as, what might come in the future. So again, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here. And Cynthia, I'll make the same offer. Well, Tom too, but I'll make the same offer I made. Bob Holycross is the Ford representative to our board of directors. I offered to test the Mach-E for him, and it never showed up. at our offices here, we'll gladly take a Bronco or an F-150 or any of those, but same with the Hummer, Tom. We have parking spaces over here. Send them on over. We'll be glad to run them through the paces here, and of course, against the 10 principles, we'll measure them for you. So, but again, thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate that. Well, this has been already a fantastic conversation, and the chat has just lit up. Just as I'm reading and listening at the same time, we've got questions about affordability and accessibility with regards to both infrastructure and the automobiles. A whole lot of interest talking about circularity of batteries, but also a full life cycle analysis and assessment of internal combustion engines and electrified vehicles. There are some really great questions here with regards to the economics and workforce and the shift that needs to take place. And then again, all these supportive policies that Steve, you and Tom have already highlighted. So I think we're going to have a really great conversation, and I think we can have probably go on for a couple of hours, but we've got another 30 minutes. So I'm really, really happy that we can also bring to our conversation here today, Dr. Greg Keoleian, who is the Peter M. Wenge Endowed Professor of Sustainable Systems and the Director of the Center for Sustainable Systems at the University of Michigan. So Greg, thank you so much for joining us. You're on mute, so I'll just have you come off mute. Thank you. And I'm going to then bring back onto the stage, if you will, in Zoom land here. We're going to have Tom with us, Cynthia, and Steve joining the panel. So thank you all again. So Greg, I'm going to start with you because we had a great big question asked, and I know you probably spend 30 minutes talking about it. I hope you won't, but just a few minutes. But this idea of the deep systemic impact of electric vehicles and the point of the assessment with regards to carbon neutrality and somebody asking, has there been that deep systemic impact of electric vehicles versus alternative powered vehicles? And I just wondered if you could address that a little bit in terms of carbon neutrality and vehicle electrification.
Sure. So the strategy to electrify is really a way to reduce life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. And if you look at greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, 29% is transportation, 25% is electricity, and 2/3 are light duty vehicles of the transportation sector. So we definitely need to electrify. And what's critical is to accelerate neutrality is we need to reduce the carbon intensity of our grids. We're 40% carbon free in the United States, 20% is renewable electricity, and 20% is nuclear. In Canada, it's about 80% carbon free. They have a lot of hydropower. So as far as impact, the grid is important that we accelerate the decarbonization. And we've done studies of the life cycle to look at the production burdens associated with the vehicle, the use burdens and end of life burdens. And in terms of production burdens, they will go up because the battery does add impact in terms of the materials and manufacturing. But the benefits in the savings in the use phase outweigh the production burdens. But to accelerate, we need to really green our grids, and that is essential. The other aspect is, and you've looked at production, and Steve and others have emphasized this, we do need to move to a circular economy because, and we did a study with Ford looking at the availability of lithium, and we probably have 100 years, but that of lithium available for vehicles, and that's with recycling. So we really need to deploy that infrastructure to recover that material and bring it back to put it in the production of the batteries for the vehicles. I could go on, but I'll stop there because I know.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that so much, and that's a really nice segue to the question that I have for Steve with regards to the circular economy and batteries, Stephen, you've outlined that so beautifully. And one of the things that I nod to that I don't think that I had fully realized until we had Adam Mueller-Wise from Clarios on a virtual session with us last year talking about the circular economy, and he talked about lead acid batteries in particular, the success of circular economy of lead acid batteries in North America, both Canada and the US and Mexico to a smaller degree. And I'm just wondering, what are some of the lessons learned there in terms of policy, in terms of design, that we can take away from lead acid batteries and apply to these emerging batteries for electric vehicles?
Yeah, great question. I mean, well, first of all, it didn't have, lead acid batteries up until, I don't know, what was it, Greg, like 82 or something like that. You were just told to stick them in the landfill. So now you wouldn't even think of it. So, but it took a while from that to, getting to a true circular economy. It took some time. And, lead acid has a bit of an advantage, but I think in the fact that it's a fairly simple design of a battery. I mean, in the 30 something years that it's been around, the design is largely the same. It has that advantage, but there's things we can learn about that. Again, that's why we're looking at metal composition, construction, materials used, both outside and inside the battery, and how that might operate. As far as recycling, we're looking at ways in which we can create a system around this to where it's actually an indexing system to where you can look at you can evaluate rather time to materials types of things, because time and labor when you're on the recycling side, that's where your cost comes from, largely, and looking at ways to get to more materials faster and easier. From a policy standpoint, I mean, I go back to what I was talking about before, and that was just, and this was what happened with lead acid batteries too, to some extent, and that was essentially, using the recycled materials was incentivized over using new materials, and I think that's important as far as if we look at what policies can be done, other than encouraging the facility to come to your town and so forth, and come to your state. Because wherever these facilities do set up, they do quite well economically. I mean, they create jobs. This truly is a revolutionary industry, and pretty much wherever they go, there's growth and economic opportunity. So as far as like maybe regionally is, do whatever you can to welcome the next lithium-ion recycling, or even better, manufacturing, like the work that Ford's doing to create batteries here in the United States.
Well, that's a great segue over to Cynthia. Cynthia, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that really exciting announcement that's come, just within the last couple of days, and the new center at Allen Park, and also to speak a little bit to, whether or not in terms of that design and those new batteries being designed for circular, designed for end of life. Would really appreciate hearing a little bit about that in terms of the vision that Ford has for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the Ford Ion Park is going to be a state-of-the-art equipment pilot manufacturing technique. It's going to, look at how we can drive down the cost of batteries at high volume manufacturing. It's going to look at different ways to manufacture the batteries, different materials, as Steve mentioned. We're going to look at all of that. And recycling is going to be part of it. And so again, the battery is the most expensive piece of the electric car, and that we understand that price has to come down. And so investing in battery technology, investing in solutions to provide cost competitive to ICE engines today. That's the goal. That's what we're working towards. And so those are some of the things that we're doing at Ford to make sure that the battery costs come down and that it's part of an entire solution. And of course, circular economy is top of mind to Ford. And you know, how might we recycle batteries? We're working together with industry. I think that's going to be key, so that we all choose a solution that can be utilized by all of us. Again, that only will help drive the cost down for our consumers. Um, we're learning from some of the things that we did with the lithium ion battery. We had a consortium that we worked together on that. But again, it's going to take us all working together and to find solutions for recycling.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Just also segueing over to Tom, thank you so much again, Tom, for your presentation and supportive policies. So some of the things that Cynthia's talked about with regards to batteries, I think also speaks to some of the things that you had identified. And we're talking about incentive, but I'd like you to speak a little bit more about harnessing the power of markets. So how do you harness the power of markets to do this type of recycling effort, as well as some of the other transition types of things that you had talked about in your presentation?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I should say that in that context, at least, the policies I was imagining were not related to battery recycling per se. And I might defer to Steve on the question of how to use markets to incentivize battery recycling. I think from GM's perspective to date, what we've been focusing on is, at least on our end, constantly assessing and exploring new chemistries to think about the ways to drive down costs and ensure reliability in our supplies. But beyond that, from a policy perspective, we're engaged with California's lithium-ion battery recycling working group, along with, I'm sure Ford is there too, and many others. And we're discussing these issues with the Biden administration to share our concerns about potential security issues in the supply chain and opportunities here for leadership from the federal government. So that's sort of how we're engaging with this from a policy perspective, and maybe Steve has more to offer on how markets might play a role there in particular. The markets that I was referring to were rather carbon pricing markets, tools to help reduce carbon emissions using market principles. And examples of that are, for example, the Transportation and Climate Initiative in the Northeast states. This is a cap and invest program. It's essentially cap and trade for transportation sector emissions. And by capping the sector's emissions in that region and then auctioning off permits to allow entities to emit carbon dioxide, you put a price on that, you create natural incentive to reduce emissions. And in doing so, you create new revenues that the region, the state, the jurisdiction in question can reinvest for this transition to the future. We think it's a really promising model, in part because we think that market-based mechanisms are both effective and efficient means of reducing emissions, but also because those revenues are so important to fund some of the other things that I mentioned in my remarks, things like EV purchase incentives or investment in charging infrastructure. That stuff isn't cheap. We hear it loud and clear when regulators and decision makers tell us that budgets are tight. They may not have the funds in the general fund, for example, to pay for a tax outlay on a tax credit or to pay for a major investment program in DCFC, which can run upwards of $100,000 per station, by the way, per port, certainly at higher power settings. We hear that, and so we're trying to think creatively about how do we raise those funds to do that. And market-based mechanisms are one way to do that, because they create these new revenues outside of the traditional tax and spend paradigm for a legislature that we can target very specifically and reinvest in these kinds of programs and projects. Low carbon fuel standards are another example of this. This is that kind of policy, and Canada's in the midst of regulating one nationally. That policy sets a standard for the carbon intensity of all transportation fuels in the industry and ratchets that down over time and expects fuel providers to meet that. And those who can do better than that can provide a fuel that is of a lower carbon intensity than the standard. They generate credits. There's money to be made here, and they can sell those credits to those who debit on that standard. And in doing so, again, you create these new revenues essentially by transferring wealth from the oil and gas guys to the electricity, the hydrogen providers, the biofuels providers. And you can use those revenues to fund, again, incentives for EV purchases, which is an example of how California uses its revenue. But the program itself creates a natural incentive for installation of public DCFC charging anyway, because those charging providers can create credits themselves by providing electricity to EV drivers and vehicles out in the market. So those are the examples that I was thinking of there. We think those are really powerful tools. We support those in many of the states and regions where they're under consideration in the US and in Canada. We'd like to see more of that actually here in the Midwest region and the Great Lakes region. Unfortunately, we're a little bit behind compared to, say, the West Coast or the Northeast, or some of the Canadian provinces and the Canadian federal government. But we're excited about the opportunity. We think these are win-win tools, and we'd like to extend that conversation here. And maybe the council is a great example of a convener for that kind of conversation, because we've got all the right players here in the room right now, cross-border, cross-sector. So maybe this is a place to talk about that more.
Just
I'm
to
going to
add
say
to
yes.
that,
Yes, go ahead, Cynthia.
just to add to that, what Tom was mentioning about the programs like LCFS, some of those programs, the way we should look at the way that they're designed, because those can help as well, eliminate equity concerns as well, and making sure that everyone would have access to vehicles. And so that's something that we should all look at in terms of how might these programs be designed and to benefit the right folks, so that we can make sure that everyone gets into the vehicles of the future.
Yeah, I think that point about affordability and accessibility comes through loud and clear. We did have an interesting question that I'd like to address to Greg, and that is, there was a question that came up in the chat. There was a lot of discussion of EV battery reuse. And, is there an opportunity to reuse something before we recycle it? And Greg, I think with your experience in battery technology for storage of electrification beyond EVs, you would be a good person to answer that question for us.
Sure. So kind of the rule is that 80% of the capacity of the battery, once there's degradation that occurs with use, each time it cycles, there's some degradation. And when the battery reaches about 80% of its original capacity, it's not that efficient to continue to use that battery on the vehicle, and that's where it would get retired. But it has a potential application of repurposing for stationary storage. And when we look at electricity use, and particularly if we look at renewables, which are variable, there can be a need for storage as we shift away from things like coal plants that provide base load power, or natural gas that could ramp up. We're going to need storage. So repurposing is an important application to consider. One of the unique distinctions between mobile and stationary is that weight doesn't matter. The fact that the battery is only 80% of its capacity is not an issue. Weight is important on vehicles, that the OEMs really work at each pound to take off the vehicle. So that is a potential pathway in a circular economy. And we've been looking at that a bit, and through our work with the RBC, Responsible Battery Coalition in Oregon. And I think it's definitely, and then, after its application, it could go back for material recycling and, in a second life for stationary storage. But really, we need to look carefully at the design of this overall circular economy infrastructure, look at the economics, the social sustainability issues, and the environmental performance. And so there's still more work needs to be done there, but there's clearly an opportunity that needs to be explored.
Well, I really appreciate that, and your point, and Cynthia's as well, in terms of social sustainability. So another area that had come up in terms of questions in the chat, so I'm going to change it a little bit. I noticed, Cynthia, Ford has made a real investment in Allen Park. Tom, as I mentioned to you before we started today, it was really heartening to me to see the Hamtramck plant come back to life. That's an area in the state of Michigan that could really use that kind of community investment and injection and great paying jobs. The question that came up was, how do you perceive that you will look forward in the future to transition as people come with electric vehicles, how will you transition workers and workforce and prepare workforce from traditional internal combustion, as well as what kind of thoughts and plans are in place to also transition the workforce of people who have historically been trained to maintain those vehicles? And I'm just curious, I know that those are really, really big questions. And I think if you could just give us your top of mind, and maybe Cynthia, you would like to start first, and then I'll go to Tom.
Sure. I know we've talked with the administration about how do we make sure that, we can reskill and retrain workers. And so I think that's going to be key as we move forward. There's going to be, as we transition, there's going to be overlap. That we'll need to bring in new facilities for batteries, not only batteries, but the supply chain that goes along with it, motors, inverters, things of that sort. So a key piece is to make sure that we work with our UAW partners to reskill the workers, retrain them, and making sure that they can, sustain in the new world that we're moving to.
Great. Tom, do you have something that you'd like to add to that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, let me just echo the importance of partnership with UAW. Of course, they're absolutely integral to GM's operations. They're a part of the broader GM family. So that partnership needs to continue, and it will continue. And our sort of manufacturing operation works hand in hand with them. But a lot of this really begins with commitments and setting your values and putting those out into the world. And I think you may have noticed last summer, Mary Barra, our CEO, set her standard. She wants GM to be the most inclusive company in the world, and that she means that along all metrics and dimensions. And that means a commitment to our workers as well. So that's manifesting itself in our partnership with UAW at Factory Zero. It's manifesting itself in our engagement with efforts like EVITP, which is a training program with the IBEW Electricians Union to train the EV infrastructure workers of the future. And ultimately, it's just worth remembering that as we transition to EV manufacturing, these are engines of job creation, not just job retention. We're building brand new battery manufacturing facilities. Those are new jobs in communities like Lordstown in Ohio and elsewhere that are going to be supporting those communities going into the future. And as you mentioned, Laura, sort of gut rehabbing and rejuvenating a legacy plant in Detroit-Hamtramck and providing that to be there for the next generation as well. So this is really an opportunity, and that's going to have spillover effects, of course, throughout the ecosystem, because when you build chargers, those chargers have to be maintained, and they're going to have to be retrofitted or improved as time goes on. This is a whole new industry that's opening up in front of us, and that's how we like to think about it, is that this is really additive rather than anything else.
That's great. Well, Greg, I think the Academy probably has some contribution to make there as well. So I'm curious from your perspective in terms of the university, if you've got some additional thoughts on this in terms of workforce reskilling and development.
Yes, I think there's going to be definitely job creation here. And I think I just want to emphasize a point that Steve made about embedding the circular economy infrastructure here in the United States. With electronics, we had electronics waste, going out of the country, exported, and not managed well. A very, hazardous exposure of hazardous materials to, countries, developing countries that were managing it. This lithium, well, it's a valuable resource. I mean, there's challenges in terms of, as Steve mentioned, but we need to keep that material here in the United States and in our economy, and really create the infrastructure here for recycling, remanufacturing, repurposing. And then I think, there's always a concern about job displacement and, looking at service stations and things like that. We're going to need, to be able to train workers, technicians to be able to manage these vehicles. And I know the OEMs are on top of that. That's, they're recognizing that. And so I think there's going to be a lot of great opportunities in terms of jobs and job creation around electrified vehicles.
All right, thank you. Steve, I wondered if you had anything, any other comments with regards to this particular topic?
No, I think folks have, pretty much covered it there.
All right, great. Well, I'm just going to go to each one of you in turn for perhaps one last comment as we get ready to wrap up this really great conversation. Like I said, I had an idea that we were going to be able to talk for about another hour or two. So Tom, at the beginning of this, we talked about what actions the region could take. And how could we be most appropriately working together and make sure that this region is a leader for the region, but also in service to the world. So just any closing comments that you have, and then I'll go to Cynthia, Steve, and end with Greg.
Sure, yeah. Well, Laura, Mark, I think we talked about this once before on the phone, but I live downtown here in Detroit, and at least pre-pandemic, it was very common to see a great many people commuting back and forth across the border, across the river every day for work. Canadians work here, Americans work there, vice versa. That'll come back again one day, but the reason I bring it up is that this region is knit very tightly together, and we can't do this alone on one side and not think about the other. And where I think about this the most is with our charging network, for example. We can't build a charging network that's robust in Ontario and ends at the Ambassador Bridge, or robust in Michigan and ends at the Ambassador Bridge. That's one place where I think we could really show the world what it means to cooperate and build a network that's designed for the future, that crosses borders, that links together communities that are already really so closely knit together that they're often one and the same. So I think that's a really promising and exciting area where we could actually leverage our partnerships and build something that shows the broader community and the country and the world what it looks like to work together to build the EV future.
Great. Cynthia.
Thanks, Laura. So in my view, I think harmonized policies, the more that we can work together and harmonize the policies across, US, Canada, globally, I think it's going to be very important, and it only will help accelerate the market. Demand side policies are needed. Sustainable incentives are needed. And I think Tom mentioned in his presentation, we're not just talking about monetary incentives, we're talking about non-monetary incentives as well. Things that will drive consumers to make the choice. Consumer education, we're going to need more education around what are these vehicles, how do you charge them, what's time of use rates, how do we work together, partner with utilities. So I think all those things are really critical, and it's going to take all of us working together to make sure that we can get to zero emissions future. And again, thanks again for having us here today. Ford is, we're glad we have the vehicles that customers will love. We have that Mach-E, we have the F-150 BEV coming, and we also have that Transit EV coming. Solutions for every need that consumers may have. And so again, try out the Mach-E. I love it. It's a great vehicle. And I know someone mentioned that they wanted to test drive it. I'll bring mine over as soon as the border's open.
All right, Steve's got his hand up. Steve, last final comments.
Oh, again, thank you for having us here. As others have said, it takes collaboration, and really that's what the organization, the Responsible Battery Coalition, is about. That's why our members represent the entire life cycle of the battery, because our approach is, we can't look at, anywhere where you're at in the supply chain, you have responsibility, in our opinion, up and down that supply chain. You got to be careful. You have to be aware of where you're getting your materials from, wherever you're getting whatever you need from, but you also have to be aware of where it's going. I think we can't be, considering looking at it just through, our own narrow focus. And that's what we hope to bring to the industry and bring to everyone, really, in working collaborative across the entire life cycle to achieve what we want to achieve. Which again, in my opinion, this is the next revolution, in the industry. I mean, innovations are happening so fast. It's just great to be a part of it, and and great to be around, in good company like the other panelists here as well. So thanks again.
Thank you, Greg.
Sure. So we are in a climate emergency and we need an aggressive response. And I'm really excited, hearing from Ford and GM and Steve's work about the strategy. We need to electrify vehicles. I was born in Detroit, auto capital of the world. We need to demonstrate this electrification here in our region, and it will need cooperation. But the strategies that are laid out by the OEMs are clear. We're seeing with the new administration a plan to help with investment. And I think it's important that we really build out the whole, not just the production of the vehicle. We need to look at the charging. We need to look at the end of life or the circular economy and recovery. And we're poised to do it. And this is the region to, really demonstrate it, because it's what is going to be required. This model is going to be required with electrification globally. And so I'm excited for what's the future going to be in this, with electrification here. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Mark, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great, and thank you, Laura. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and for the Electrifying Mobility in the Great Lakes Region Dialogue. 6 years ago this week, in fact, the council launched the Great Lakes Economic Forum in Chicago. Since then, the forum has become what I think is a premier thought leadership and action platform for business and government, academia, and nonprofit leaders. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, we've had to shift everything online to a virtual environment, to a virtual world. But our philosophy behind the forum is still the same. Working together, the Great Lakes region can become the most prosperous, innovative, sustainable, and welcoming region in the world. And we can achieve this by creating more dynamic, multi-sector collaborations to find new ways of leveraging our economic strengths and assets, by improving the well-being and prosperity of the region's citizens. This region is home to 107 million people, but also finding new ways of working together to protect the environment for current and future generations. However, we can't build a better future without each of you. So I hope you'll consider becoming a member and supporting the council. You can learn more about our work at councilgreatlakesregion.org. Including our new Circular Great Lakes initiative, which we just launched on March 31st. So pleased to hear a lot of you talk about circular economy. And so I hope you'll learn more about that Circular Great Lakes initiative, but also our Great Lakes Higher Education Consortium, which is connecting universities across borders to focus on skills and talent development, how we can go deeper and faster on research and innovation across borders. And how do we create a new generation of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurships and startups in the Great Lakes region? And finally, as you can see on the screen, please register for our May 13th event, which we're hosting jointly with CityAge, where we'll explore renewables and energy storage technologies in the Great Lakes in greater detail. And so with that, thank you for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation, and stay tuned for more events in the weeks and months to come. Thank you.